Hi, I'm Mary Greendale, and welcome to another edition of Just Thinking. Today, I am talking with the chair of the Select Board, John Cronin, and we are going to discuss an article that is on the town meeting warrant. The article specifically calls for an upgrade, if you will, to the duties and responsibilities of the town administrator to a town manager. And we have plenty to talk about. Hey, John.
Good evening. How are you?
Well, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good. So clearly, I've read it. We've tried this before and so forth. Before we jump into this, I just want to explain in my own fashion why we're doing, not just why we're doing this, but why you've even got this article.
Will that have something to do with these white blocks?
It does. It does.
Excellent.
You are so sharp. And you see, that's, boy, these blocks. Now, I'm going to ask you, which one of the folks that we elect here is in charge of whatever happens in town government?
There's not one person.
Okay, how about that town administrator? We hired him. Is he in charge?
No.
So, when something goes wrong, I'm going to take the strategic plan. We worked, long years here. You had your counterpart, the strategic plan, all those things. If we do a master plan, who's responsible for maintaining the consistency, the coordination, and implementation of that plan?
Not a single person.
Okay. And that's why we're here talking about a
I should say not a single
Not
person,
one person.
multiple people
Right.
are.
So a little bit belongs here or here or here or here or here. It doesn't, it all varies.
Yep.
But on a day-to-day basis, who's responsible for managing the staff? And I'm going to start with the Board of Assessors because I know the answer, because I'm on the Board of Assessors for a little bit longer. We are responsible for saying that this staff is doing what it's supposed to do, and we certainly know what it does by the products that it delivers to us. But in terms of how the office operates in terms of the bigger picture of government, relationships across departments, how much they share information, and all of those kinds of things, we don't know. And so about 2 years ago, we tried a test plan and started working with Travis to kind of do a lot of what's in your warrant article. So why don't we just jump there and say, now, who would be in charge?
Well, the short answer is the town administrator under this act would become a town manager, and the town manager would then become responsible for the day-to-day oversight of the staff assigned to each of these boards and committees. And in that way, the town manager would be supporting the library trustees, the Board of Assessors, the parks, the Board of Health, Planning Board, and so forth. Supporting through accountability, coupled evaluation, so the boards will perform evaluation of staff. Travis will contribute to that. In some ways, especially for any of these individuals that are within the town hall structure, it's passively done already. He's giving support to your staff and support to Board of Health staff and so forth, but it's not formalized. And it's not that thread of accountability or day-to-day supervision that I think you're trying to put your finger on. And it would be beneficial, I think, to town governance to have that kind of singular thread weaving through it to help the boards communicate more effectively for the public good.
Well, and to coordinate so that it may be that there are certain, I'm going to again say if we invest in a master plan, so you invest $100,000, $150,000 in a master plan, which we've done on 2 different occasions, how does it get implemented if in fact nobody can direct anybody else to participate? That's the single biggest thing. There is no way that we can all work together except on a voluntary willingness.
Well, one thing that's important to note about what we're trying to achieve with this warrant article is that we're not superseding the elected authority of these boards and committees.
Right.
They maintain and will continue to maintain that authority and autonomy. So the town manager does not all of a sudden become a mayor or somebody who oversees all of them. That is not the case. We're not trying to achieve that. This is simply an administrative action to support each of these elected boards and the staff that reside in them. He is going to be more involved and more accountable to the boards and committees as they try to achieve what you just said.
And I, for one, would be beating against you if you were trying to take the authority of the boards and commissions, because I totally 100% believe in our volunteer government.
In early February, I contacted each of the chairs of these committees, and to a person, they all said the same thing. They're all enthusiastic about it. They all supported it individually, but they wanted to know, are you trying to, in any way, create some language that would undermine or otherwise grab authority? I said, absolutely not. So this evening, I'm grateful for the opportunity to come in and introduce the language and let you know that, and anyone listening, that this language is up on our website. It's under the Spring 2024 Town Meeting Preparatory products. We recently finalized the language, the final language of it last evening. It's been in a working phase since about mid or early March through council input of each of the participants on these boards, as well as other stakeholders, and I can get into that later on. But it's been a progressive march towards a product that we think makes perfect sense at this time.
I think the timing is critical in terms of a lot of other towns have had town managers for many years, Ashland for like 25, but I would like to point out that Holliston tried to do this in 1994. 30 years ago, and I was there. 30 years ago, we tried to get to the point where the administration could actually be handled by a town manager, and one of my biggest complaints was that I was still signing warrants. It's 30 years later, and you're still signing warrants every single week for bill paying. Please explain to me, did you ever really understand why you were doing that? It always, anyway. So the point, the one question that, or not one question, but a question that I would like to pose is, what are the negatives? For anybody who's come back at you and said, oh, this is a bad idea, I'm not doing it. What are the negatives?
Change.
Wow. Okay, I'll give you that there's a resistance to change. That's my number one finding from having done the town report. It's the truth. I write it right in the 300th anniversary book. My number one finding is very resistant to change, okay?
We're humans.
What can I tell you?
Yeah.
But other than that, what's the feedback?
It's been universally positive. Let me give you some details. So, as I mentioned, I reached out to the various chairs of these boards who, as I mentioned, universally supported it. I think a lot of it had to do with their personal experience with our current town administrator, who's done a wonderful job since he's been with us the last several years. He consistently gets high marks, and he's a very good manager. He's very effective. He's just passionate. He understands the goals and nature of Holliston in a way now that is very, very becoming. He fits in well, so he's a good match for this kind of a solution. And I could imagine that going forward, you know, if for some reason he moves on or some day comes when he's not there, the town will be looking for somebody like him who understands the nuances of managing a town like ours with the boards and committees that would be responsible to the town manager. Once I got through with each of these individuals, our board started to reach out to other stakeholders, people who were not maybe directly affected by it, but more indirectly. For example, I sent the language to the school committee chair, the finance committee chair. These are people that won't be touched by this language, but have an interest. They want to know how will this, if it would. With respect to the school, we got feedback from the school committee chair, which was to really explicitly state inside this proposal that this language in no way impacts the school's authority, and the school's authority that's carved out in Mass General Law. We put all of the edits that were requested into the document. The Finance Committee chair had several edits that were not formulaic, but edits for content, spelling, clarity, things like that. And he also had some other nuanced questions which we forwarded along to council, and he's cleaned up the language to reflect what we think is the interest of that chairperson. There was another member of the Finance Committee who wanted to know if this language has any preemption clause, and council ruled it out and said there is not.
I don't know what that means.
It's preemption, meaning would the creation of this act collide with an existing language in a general law that provides, for example, authority for a Board of Health agent or something like that. It's
okay.
preemption. And further from that, we did reach out to Sam Tyler, who you know was the former head of our governance committee. Sam had done some work towards this product in the last several years when the governance committee was in play. But more importantly, Sam has over 40 years of public management experience. I would argue he's one of the most learned individuals skills and knowledgeable of municipal governance that I personally know. And we
In the
met-
state, I would add, in the state.
I would concur. And Sam sat down with Travis and I, and he had a different take. He said, I see this as, if I quote him correctly, town manager light. It doesn't go far enough. He pointed out some areas that he would like to lean into. And we specifically, explained to him that what we're trying to achieve is, for the sake of change, and we're not trying to shock the system by going full bore into a classic town manager role that supersedes a lot of authority and grabs authority. This is an effort to carve out administrative efficiency, managerial oversight where necessary, and you talked about that, but most of all, accountability. We recognize that town government is evolving constantly, and that evolution has made it more and more and more complex. When we concluded our work last night, you had 3 select board members, several of us who have been around a warrant or two, and we complimented the town administrator for the work he did to get us to that point. It is very, very complex, and it was done so perfectly, it's hard to quibble with it. It's a hard skill to perform. It takes a lot of knowledge and education to achieve that kind of a skill. It's important to reward and recognize when you see that kind of a skill, you invest in it. But it also means that you can't really rely on something less than that. Let me briefly explain. I understand back in maybe the mid-1900s, many communities like Holliston were very small. The governance, the management, the needs, the wants of a community were managed by a select board, selectmen at the time, that did their work, sometimes monthly, and just paid the bills, as you said.
Can I just stop you there?
Yeah,
What date did you say?
mid-1900s.
In Holliston, it was 1950. It was all the way up until 1980, where the town clerk and the Board of Selectmen did the work.
And then, and by the way, that model's still in place in some smaller communities in Western Mass. So it feels like something that's generated by population and the interests of the citizens. What do they want? So fast forward to, as you point out, to the 1980s or so forth, and the town hired an executive secretary. And this is somebody who works just for the board and begins doing some of the professional oversight work. And as we both know, in the 80s, there was a milestone. The Prop 2.5 guideline came in. That really changed the nature of governance. And then certainly through the 80s and 90s, as the economy ebbed and flowed, there were a lot of pressures put on governance to manage budgets and so forth. So that expertise had to evolve. And I think that's where Sam started to really pay a lot of attention internally to the need to bring that executive secretary up. And I know something about the work you described 30 years ago that gave us the current town administrator model. And that was done through a lot of effort to try and evolve the position, similar to what we're trying to achieve now. And there was some horse trading back then and some conversations about making sure the town administrator didn't take too much authority away from the select board. And Sam described when we met with him the need to keep pushing to professionalize the role to allow these elected/civilian or volunteer roles to create policy. They don't need to be paying bills or negotiating contracts or managing staff on a day-to-day basis. They're not there to do that. So the evolution of this process, I think, is important to note that it's been 30 years since the town recognized the need to bring it up to a town administrator. And here we are 30 years later pointing in the direction of need to keep up and produce a product, or in this case, a job description that's reflective of the needs and the accountability, the day-to-day seamless supervision, and the removal of the select board from the day-to-day operations of a board are all wrapped into this proposal and nothing more.
One of the interesting things is when we were tackling the issue back in the 80s and the early 90s, there was not this public administration career track. There was not this whole, it was just beginning. It was just beginning to evolve that there was a place for this kind of thing. People who invest and do their education, and in our case has a master's degree, but not everybody does. But people who invest in that have a certain expectation of what sorry, I said that backwards. People who hire people with that kind of ability and education and experience have a certain expectation of what they're going to get. And I think that they can deliver more than what we're used to, and I think they need to. fundamentally think they need to. It's just changed so much. It's changed so much in my lifetime here. And back in, Joanne Hulbert tells a cute story that in 1958, when they were looking for a town superintendent, everybody took turns to try to figure out, you'd volunteer for positions that were needed in town. And her father volunteered for that, even though he was a farmer. He didn't know anything about, running a highway. That was fine. It worked fine to a point, But then at another point, we needed, in our department, we did something different. We started to hire people who had both training, skills, experience, and all that kind of stuff. Same thing here, it seems. Yep.
We've arrived.
We have arrived. We have arrived. So is there anything specific in here that you want to make sure that you get out to the public that they...
Well, a few things. First of all, should the town look favorably upon this warrant article, it effectively puts in motion a special act. It will then be sent to the state legislature.
Does it have to pass town meeting?
It does.
Okay.
Simple
And
majority.
then does it have to pass an election?
No. It goes to the
Just
state.
to the legislature.
It goes to the special. It goes to the legislature for consideration by the Great and General Court as a special act. We recently tracked a similar action out in Belchertown. They moved from a town administrator to town manager. It took just under a year. So it won't happen automatically upon the vote. It will be reviewed by Beacon Hill, and we hope to see the fruit of their action about a year from now. So that's one factor. The second factor is what we're trying to achieve today is, as you correctly pointed out, Mary, sort of the next evolutionary step. 30 years later, trying to catch up, give the rule the kind of guardrails and structure it needs. This isn't the end, though. I would think that someone who's sitting in this seat or the select board seat, or any seat for that matter in the next 25, 30 years, will have another look at it. These things need to be looked at. This particular role, I believe, was called out by the Division of Local Services when they came in and looked at our governance back in 2018, 2019. They recognized that Holliston is a cluster of communities, Medway, Medfield, Midway, Hopkinton, Ashland. We're all very similar in that regard. We need to recognize the professionalized need to manage the town. And so if I were in town meeting looking at this, I'd like to see, well, what is it today and what will this act do tomorrow? We've prepared a grid that shows sort of the growth or the changes and the modest changes that are in play here for the voters to understand structurally. If I could go through that very briefly, I'll explain.
Is this available somewhere?
Yes. Actually, tomorrow we expect most of this product to be available through Holliston Reporter. It's been sent along to the publishers for them to move and produce for their viewers' interest. It's also, as I mentioned at the outset, on our website. So one of the things that's going to happen is the town manager becomes the chief operating officer within a chief administrative officer role. This goes to what you initially opened up with. Who's in charge, right? Who's the person we're going to go to? Now, most people would say, well, we know it's the town administrator. This fortifies that. The town warrant, which pays all our bills, it's a critical but administrative function, will now be approved for and by the town manager. The town manager will be given the ability to reorganize and create or consolidate town departments. So that's managing how town departments interface and optimize how they do their work on our behalf. Let's see, the town manager will be officially labeled the chief financial officer, which is really necessary for documents, contracts, and things like that. No change to the reporting mechanism to the select board or the finance committee, statutory or bylaw role. That's important. If I could stop there before I progress on the few other items, I wanted to mention one thing. We started with a model that came from the town of Wayland. Our board talked about a couple of different options, and Wayland surfaced as a suitable comp because it was relevant, it was recent, and we understood from folks over there that they took pains to carve out a town manager role that specifically did not touch finance committee roles. Okay, the town at this point, we're not looking in any way to change the bylaw associated with the finance committee. Period. At all. Not at all. We're looking to fortify the management side of town government. That's it. So the finance committee still stays within their silo of doing what they do, and this town manager role will just be elevated to be more accountable to the select board to the citizens and the boards he or she serves. That's it. But that Wayland model to us achieved that threading of the needle that gave the town manager the lift, the responsibilities that we desired, while leaving intact the role of the finance committee. That's very important. Okay, and I think we've achieved that quite nicely. Moving on with a couple more changes that people can expect. The town manager can execute grant applications and awards without approval of the select board. It increases hiring to all non-school department heads. So in other words, now the select board no longer has to be responsible for hiring department heads that are currently not mentioned in the special act. Are you familiar with that? Mm-hmm. The special act, when it was drafted, envisioned by name certain department heads. It never envisioned an assistant town administrator or some other roles, the facility manager and so forth. So we have to do it. It's awkward. All of the department heads now go to the town manager, including police and fire. The town manager will be responsible for day-to-day management of all of these staff members, and also will be responsible for collective bargaining. Mary, as you probably know, I have a career in public management, so I'm very familiar with negotiating contracts. I do it for a living. I don't have any problem sitting down talking to our DPW or our police department negotiating contracts. I've done a couple. It's great. It's wonderful. It's easy. But I also recognize that my peers don't know that, and some of my peers that may come behind me don't have that experience, and you need something. A select board member need not be in that room. It needs to be negotiated by a skilled individual who understands collective bargaining, budgeting, finance, the impacts of changes, the ability to comp those values to other contracts. We're giving the town manager all that authority now because the board doesn't really need to get involved at that point. The board will approve the contract once those terms are agreed to. So that captures most of the major changes that we propose.
Okay, you referred to a document that came from the state, and I think you said it was 2018. I'm vaguely thinking of one, may not be the same one, that was like 2021, in which the state said that our horizontal structure left us vulnerable
Yes.
to, because of the lack of coordination between and among, that it left us vulnerable and that we should look at changing that.
I believe it did.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing was, in terms of the hire and fire, I have to admit that the personnel, I didn't realize even, I thought once we had a personnel director that all of the stuff was going through him or her, okay? And yet come to find out that when this town administrator arrived, he found that, there were some parts and pieces that weren't exactly all following the same
There was
plans.
a lack of conformity.
Yeah.
That's a fact. Yeah.
So I think that's probably the kind of thing that DLS was talking about. I mean, you can't have different rules for different departments. It just does not.
I think they were, and I also think that what DLS was trying to signal is beware of the risk. So, for example, I'm looking at your boards in front of you. If the Board of Assessors was working on a reclassification projects or a classification of properties, and that information had to go to the state, and the state needed the executive board to look at something, and if we had a town administrator who was very silo-driven, he or she may look at that and say, that's not my job. And I've seen that happen too often where staff or department heads won't cross that line, won't look to close a loop, won't look to do what's right because it's not their job.
Well, and I hope you don't mean it's that they're just rejecting the idea.
No, but I think what DLS was trying to signal was the risk is with such a horizontal structure, it runs the risk of silo-driven thinking. And that's what we don't want. We want all of these boards and commissions to be talking, collaborating, and using our resources to their optimal benefit. That's the desire, not to be silo-driven like what I think DLS was thinking.
Yeah, well, I know for sure, and in fact, in the assessor's office that, you can get in your own little bubble. You can. It's not hard. But I think we tend to kind of bubble up and be sort of those free thinkers, we'll call it. All right, is there anything else that we need to be aware of?
One other thing, this came up in our conversation with a couple of different stakeholders. Some of the town managers in other communities oversee a town clerk. Holliston has an elected town clerk, and so we decided again to try to minimize any impact of what we're trying to achieve. We're going to have an elected town clerk until we don't. And I don't want to speak for her, but as long as she's elected, she's elected. We're not looking to stamp on that or change that through this act. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, Mary, in 20 years or whatever number of years it'll be before this is looked at again, when that opportunity or vacancy occurs, let the select board and the stakeholders at the time visit that to say, is now the time to go to an appointed role that would report up through this structure. We're not touching it now simply because we have something that's intact. It's frankly quite functional. She's certified. She does a wonderful job. So we're not trying to impact that role at all. Some people have asked, so that's the reason for it.
Well, and we used to have elected treasurers.
I heard that.
And treasurer, tax collector, and the accountant. We used to call him an auditor. And what happened in the 80s, it was late 80s, we decided that we probably shouldn't do that. And I was very outspoken at the time because I said, look, you know, I might be able to get elected, but you don't want me handling the money, you know, because I just I'm not good with the records.
Right.
So what we did then was we waited until those office holders retired.
Yeah.
When they retired, then it was, then it was an opportunity. And the issue now is, can you find qualified people for all of these jobs living in every town in Massachusetts? Is there a qualified town clerk that happens to live in each community in Massachusetts? I don't know.
I don't either, but
Yeah.
I wanted to point that out because it did come up in a couple of our conversations. Again, we did examine a lot of different opportunities to expand or change this to suit our needs. Every community's town manager is different. When
Yep.
you start pinging them and looking at them, there is not one size that fits all. I'll point out, Medway went to a town manager model without changing the job at all. They just changed the title, which was interesting. We have no intention right now of changing the salary of the individual, the town administrator currently. As you know, I'm leaving the board, but the future board could examine that when the contract opens up at the next cycle based upon these duties, but we're not here to say that once this passes, he or she becomes this dollar amount. That's not in play. I would fully expect the board, when they seat and they get this special act approved, to recognize and award the town administrator this new role of town manager. No need to repost or anything like that. It's simply reclassifying the position.
Yeah, okay.
And we'll
That's
let
interesting.
let the future board deal with any financial impact that may come, but it's not envisioned right now. This is not for a financial purpose.
Right.
Yeah, and Travis has been great. You know, we try to speak of him in the third person, so it's not personal. But he came into
It's
this.
got to be painful, though. I mean, a little awkward.
Yeah,
Awkward?
I would feel that way. But he's been great as we progress through what we hope will be a successful vote at town meeting. He's so professional and so good at what he does. You wouldn't know if he's for or against it. He's just, here's the information, let me help you get to where you need to go. And frankly, through those actions, it speaks volumes of why he needs to become our next town manager. He's so good. And I think the town recognizes through the stakeholders that I've talked to, and that includes these board chair people, that we have something good, we need to make it better. Standing still and allowing that risk or those poor communication lines to continue is not in anybody's interest. We're simply trying to make what we do and how we do it more seamless and more professional. And let the volunteer elected officials do what they do best, make policy.
Make policy and communicate with the community. I mean, that's the other piece. You know, you got an issue, I expect you're going to get a phone call. You know, that's kind of the way it's supposed to be.
Right.
But, and that way then maybe it's something that you don't have to take to a staff person, you don't have to disturb them at all, or maybe it isn't.
With this information being up and publicly available to that point, if any citizens listening or watching or reading it between now and town meeting have any questions, call me, email me. You can get me right through the town website. I would love to talk to you about any concerns or thoughts you might have to allay you of any fears of what this change may mean. We think it's the right time to tackle it, and it's modest. It doesn't go too far, but it goes far enough to give us the improvements we need.
You know, it reminded me the other day when Congress passed 4 challenging bills, and they did them each one separately. It reminded me of this. It reminded, in the past, we've done big bundles,
Yeah.
and as a result, there were just so many parts and pieces that people had to understand. It was easy to pick off and create situations where there was conflict. I
Yeah.
think this is much more direct. It's very specific.
It is. Look, I expect some questions at town meeting. I hope
Yeah,
there's questions
there
at town.
should be.
I want a debate on it. I want people to feel comfortable, like we do, on advancing this position, because without that kind of query, we're not going to build the kind of community and accountability that we desire. We're hoping that when it's done, people will see not only the benefit, but the services and the support that this role can perform will really benefit, we think, the quality of the job that gets done. So it's natural evolution. I'm glad we had the chance to talk about the history, because it's an interesting one.
Oh, yeah.
But I also don't think it's different. You know, it's New England. It's a town meeting. This is what people, you know,
They hang on to.
We work for them. We need to give them the options to consider these changes, and we hope they support them.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I certainly support town meeting. I certainly support the form of government we have, and I certainly support moving to a town manager on a personal level. It's just time. But at any rate. Okay, thanks, John, very much. If you're done.
We are done. I want to thank all the folks that helped put this together, all my peers on the select board, as well as the boards and committees that gave us feedback. I especially want to thank Sam Tyler, who I have such deep respect for. I think he's one of our gems in this community. I regret to this day how the governance committee had to sunset its work. He was heavily involved in some progress. At this stage, he's just remained somebody who is devoted to good government, good thinking. He's always there to help us, and I look forward to hearing his thoughts about this at town meeting as well. So we've had a lot of feedback from everyone. It's been incorporated. A lot of good work here, so thank you for the opportunity to speak about it, and thanks to everybody for helping us bring this product to fruition and hopefully to approval.
Okay, thank you very much, and that will take care of us for today. Thanks. See you next time.